At my granddaughter's wedding, I noticed my name tag said something that made a stranger laugh out loud before I even stepped into the ballroom. "The old lady who's paying for everything," he read, not realizing I was standing right behind him. I smiled. I always do. I took the small white card from the table, ran my thumb over the smooth lettering, and pinned it carefully to my dress, as if it were exactly what I had expected to see. The ballroom doors opened into a sea of soft gold light and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place that smells faintly of roses and expensive champagne. My granddaughter Emily had always dreamed of something like this. I remember when she was 8, sitting at my kitchen table, drawing pictures of her perfect wedding, with glitter pins I had bought her from a little craft store downtown. Back then, she used to say I would sit in the front row, right next to her parents. Back then, she used to hold my hand like I was part of everything. I stepped inside, the sound of a string quartet floating through the air, and I could feel it almost immediately. Not the music. The shift. The way a few heads turned just a second too long. The way someone leaned toward another guest and whispered behind a glass of wine. I didn't look down at my name tag again. I didn't need to. I could feel it hanging there, heavier than paper should ever feel. A young woman in a pale blue dress brushed past me, her eyes flicking to my chest before she quickly looked away, her lips pressed together like she was holding something in. I kept walking. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor, steady, measured, controlled. I found my table near the center of the room, not tucked away, not honored either. Just placed. A few guests were already seated, chatting lightly, their laughter warm but edged with something I couldn't quite name until one of them glanced at me, then at the tag, and offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, raising his glass slightly, "we should thank you, I suppose." There was a ripple of polite laughter around the table. I returned the gesture with a small nod, my own smile calm, practiced, effortless. I had learned a long time ago that silence can say more than any argument ever could. I took my seat, smoothing the fabric of my dress over my knees, the same navy silk I had worn to my husband's retirement dinner 10 years ago. He used to say it made me look elegant. He used to say a lot of things that made me feel seen. Across the room, I spotted Daniel, my son, standing beside Rebecca. They looked perfect together, polished and composed, greeting guests like they belonged in a magazine. Rebecca laughed at something someone said, her hand resting lightly on Daniel's arm, her posture relaxed, confident. For a moment, Daniel glanced in my direction. Our eyes met, just for a second. Then his gaze dropped, not to my face, but lower, to the tag. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked away. And that was when I understood. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. Something chosen. Something deliberate. I folded my hands neatly in my lap and looked out across the room again, taking in every detail. The floral arrangements I had helped pay for. The custom linens. The delicate place settings. Every piece of it carefully curated, every detail flawless. I listened as the music swelled slightly, as more guests arrived, as the quiet hum of conversation filled the space. And I sat there, wearing that name like it belonged to me, like it was a role I had agreed to play. I didn't remove it. I didn't hide it. I let it sit there, visible to anyone who cared to look. Because if there was one thing I had learned after 72 years, it was this. When people show you exactly who they are, you don't interrupt them. You watch. You remember. And you wait. I stayed at that table longer than I needed to, long enough to notice how conversations shifted depending on who was speaking and who was being watched. There is a rhythm to gatherings like this, a quiet choreography people follow without thinking. They lean in when something is amusing. They lower their voices when something is not meant to be shared, and they look away when something makes them uncomfortable. I saw all three happen within the first 10 minutes. A woman across from me complimented the floral arrangements, her voice light and pleasant, but her eyes drifted again to my chest before, settling somewhere just past my shoulder. A man beside her chuckled softly and said something about how weddings had become so extravagant these days. I nodded once, politely, as if I had not spent the last 6 months reviewing invoices, approving deposits, and writing checks that added up to more than the price of my first home. I did not correct him. I did not correct anyone. Instead, I reached for the water glass in front of me and took a small sip, letting the coolness settle something inside me that was beginning to sharpen. Across the room, servers moved in smooth, practiced lines, carrying trays of champagne flutes that caught the light like tiny mirrors. I recognized the catering company. Rebecca had insisted on them. She said they were the best in the state, that Emily deserved nothing less. I had agreed. I always agreed when it came to Emily. That had been my mistake, I realized now. Not the money. Not the time. The assumption that love would be recognized without needing to be announced. A burst of laughter rose from a nearby table, louder this time, less restrained. Someone said the words, "lucky grandmother," and the phrase lingered in the air just long enough to land where it was meant to. I turned my head slightly, not enough to appear interested, just enough to confirm what I already knew. Two women were looking directly at me, their expressions caught somewhere between amusement and curiosity, as if they were trying to decide whether I was aware of the joke or part of it. I held their gaze for a brief moment, then offered the same composed smile I had been wearing since I arrived. They looked away first. The music shifted, signaling that the ceremony would begin soon, and guests started to rise from their seats, smoothing dresses, adjusting jackets, stepping into place like actors returning to their marks. I stood with them, careful, unhurried, my movements measured in a way that comes from years of knowing that dignity is often the only thing no one can take from you unless you hand it over yourself. As I made my way toward the seating area, I passed a long table near the entrance where envelopes and gifts had been neatly arranged. I recognized several names written in elegant script, families I had known for decades, people who had watched Daniel grow up, who had attended birthday parties and holiday dinners in the house I once filled with noise and warmth. I wondered, briefly, what they thought when they saw that small white card pinned to my dress. Not what they said, what they thought. The difference matters more than most people realize. I took my seat in the second row, not the first. That space had been reserved for Daniel and Rebecca, of course, along with a few carefully chosen relatives from Rebecca's side of the family. I folded my hands again, resting them lightly against my purse, and looked toward the aisle where Emily would soon appear. For a moment, just a moment, the memory of her as a child returned so clearly that it almost softened everything else. Her small hand in mine, her voice asking if I would always be there. I had said yes without hesitation. I had meant it. The music swelled again, fuller now, and everyone turned their attention forward. I did the same. I did not touch the name tag. I did not hide it beneath my shawl. I let it remain exactly where it was, visible, undeniable. Because by then, I understood something with a clarity that surprised even me. This was not just about a wedding. This was not even about money. It was about position. About who was allowed to stand at the center and who was expected to remain useful at the edges. I had spent years believing those two things could coexist. Sitting there, surrounded by polished smiles and practiced warmth, I realized I had been wrong. And once a person sees that kind of truth, there is no going back to the version of the story that came before. The ceremony began with the kind of music that is meant to make people feel something soft and certain, the kind that fills a room without asking permission, and everyone rose at once as if guided by the same invisible hand. I stood with them, my posture straight, my expression calm, my eyes fixed on the aisle where Emily would appear. When she finally did, there was a collective intake of breath that moved through the room like a wave. She looked beautiful. There is no other word for it. The dress, the veil, the way she held herself, it all came together in a way that made everything else seem smaller for a moment. I felt something in my chest shift, not break, not soften, just shift, as I watched her take her first step forward. For those few seconds, the room forgot about me. That was almost a relief. I focused on her, on the way her hand rested lightly on her father's arm, on the way her eyes searched the room for familiar faces. She looked at Daniel. She looked at Rebecca. She looked at the front where her future was waiting. She did not look at me. I did not expect her to. Not anymore. The officiant began to speak, his voice steady and practiced, weaving together words about love and commitment and the importance of family. The word family lingered longer than the others, as if it deserved more space. I listened carefully, not because I needed to hear it, but because I wanted to understand how easily people use that word without considering what it requires. Around me, guests leaned slightly toward one another, whispering comments too quiet to catch completely, but clear enough in their intention. I heard my name once, then again, followed by a soft laugh that ended too quickly. I kept my gaze forward. I had learned that looking directly at something like that only encourages it to grow. Instead, I noticed smaller things. The way Rebecca adjusted her bracelet 3 times in a row. The way Daniel cleared his throat when the officiant mentioned loyalty. The way Emily's smile flickered for just a second when she repeated her vows, as if she was aware of something beneath the surface but not ready to name it. Time moved in a strange way during the ceremony, stretching in some moments and folding in others, until suddenly it was over. Applause filled the room, warm and loud and rehearsed, and people began to turn back toward each other, their attention shifting from the couple to the celebration that would follow. I remained seated for a moment longer than everyone else, just long enough to take one more look at the aisle, now empty, before I stood and joined the slow movement back toward the reception area. As I walked, I passed 2 men standing near the doorway, both holding glasses of champagne. One of them nodded in my direction, his expression polite but curious. The other leaned closer to him and said, not quite quietly enough, "Well, I guess she really did cover everything." There was a pause, then a short laugh, the kind that tries to disguise itself as harmless. I did not stop. I did not turn. I let the words settle exactly where they belonged, not on me, but around me, like something I could step through without carrying with me. The reception room felt different now, louder, brighter, more animated. Music replaced the quiet solemnity of the ceremony, and servers moved more quickly, refilling glasses, clearing plates, keeping everything in motion. I returned to my table, but I did not sit immediately. Instead, I stood there for a moment, taking in the scene with a kind of clarity that only comes when expectation has been fully replaced by understanding. Every detail was still perfect. Every element still in place. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I reached up then, just briefly, and touched the edge of the name tag, not to remove it, not to hide it, but to feel it, to confirm it was still there. It was. Of course it was. I lowered my hand and finally knew how to present a story, the version that knew which details to include and which to leave out. He began by thanking everyone for coming, his voice warm, measured, practiced. He spoke about Emily, about how proud he was, about the years that had led to this moment. The room responded exactly as expected, with soft laughter at the right moments, with quiet agreement when he mentioned love and commitment and family. Always that word again. Family. Then he shifted slightly, his tone changing just enough to signal something more personal. And of course, he said, lifting his glass just a little higher, none of this would have been possible without the incredible support we have had along the way. There was a pause, intentional, controlled. I felt it before he finished the sentence. We are especially grateful to my mother, he continued, his gaze moving briefly in my direction before settling somewhere just above my head. For her generosity in helping make this day everything Emily dreamed it would be. The room responded immediately. Applause. Polite at first, then stronger, louder, filling the space with a kind of approval that felt almost rehearsed. Several heads turned toward me, some smiling, some curious, some simply observing. I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging the attention without inviting more of it. I did not raise my glass. I did not stand. I let the applause pass over me like something that belonged to someone else. Daniel continued speaking, but his words blurred slightly at the edges as something else began to settle into place inside me. Not anger, not even disappointment. Something holding it lightly between my fingers, not to drink, but to give my hands something to do while I considered everything I had just seen. A woman from the neighboring table leaned slightly toward me, her smile wide, her tone bright. "You must be so proud," she said, her eyes flicking once more to the card pinned to my dress. I met her gaze, steady and calm. "I am," I replied, my voice even, my expression unchanged. She nodded quickly, as if that confirmed something for her, then turned back to her table, her interest already fading now that she had her answer. I set the glass back down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the table, as if precision mattered in a moment like this. Across the room, Emily and her new husband were being surrounded by guests. Congratulations offered in waves, photographs taken from every angle. She looked happy, truly happy, and for a moment, I let that be enough. But only for a moment, because beneath that, beneath the music and the laughter and the carefully constructed image, all at once, but piece by piece, like something I had always known but never allowed myself to fully see. There was the first time Rebecca had insisted on hosting Thanksgiving at her house, explaining that it would be easier for everyone if I did not have to worry about all the work. I had agreed, grateful even, until I realized I had been given a seat at the far end of the table, away from the center where conversations flowed most easily. Then there were the birthdays, the small changes in timing, the quiet decisions made without asking me, the polite notifications instead of invitations. "We thought this would be best," she would say, her tone always gentle, always reasonable. And Daniel would nod beside her, as if agreement had become his default setting. I had told myself it was normal, that families evolve, that roles shift, that I needed to make space. But sitting there now, with that small white card still pinned to my dress, I could see the line connecting all of it. Not random, not accidental, directed. I watched as Rebecca approached a woman near the center of the room, someone I recognized as the wedding planner. They leaned in toward each other, their voices low, their expressions focused in a way that had nothing to do with anything. I felt calmer, clearer, the kind of clarity that does not come from guessing, but from finally understanding. Across the room, Daniel was speaking with a group of guests, his posture relaxed, his smile easy. Rebecca joined him a moment later, her hand slipping naturally into his arm, her head tilting slightly as she listened. It is remarkable how easily people accept silence when it is delivered with confidence. Across the room, the newly married couple had taken their place at the center of the dance floor, surrounded by a loose circle of guests, cameras raised, phones held steady, capturing moments that would later be edited into something perfect. Emily rested her head briefly against her husband's shoulder, her eyes closing for just a second, and for that moment, everything about her felt genuine again, untouched by whatever had been arranged around her. I allowed myself to hold on to that image, not because it changed anything, but because it reminded me why I had agreed to all of this in the first place. Not for Daniel, not for Rebecca, for her, always for her. I shifted my attention then, slowly, deliberately, scanning the edges of the room rather than the center. That is where the real movement happens. Not where everyone is looking, but where no one thinks to. Near the back, partially obscured by a column, I saw the wedding planner again, speaking with a man I did not immediately recognize. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, dressed in a dark suit that was well-tailored but not overly fashionable. The kind of man who did not attend events like this for celebration but for purpose. He held a thin folder in one hand, his posture straight, his expression neutral. The planner gestured lightly as she spoke, her tone appearing calm, but her movements slightly tighter than before. The man listened, nodding once, then glancing briefly in my direction before looking back at her. That was enough to confirm what I had already begun to suspect. This was not about a misunderstanding. It was not about a misplaced detail or a careless decision. It was coordinated, structured. I did not react. I did not even allow my expression to shift. Instead, I reached for my purse, opening it slowly, deliberately, as if I were searching for something entirely unrelated. My fingers moved past the usual items, the small compact, the folded handkerchief, until they settled on a thin envelope I had placed there earlier that afternoon. I had not planned to use it. Not tonight. Not here. But I had brought it with me anyway. Out of habit more than intention, the way one carries an umbrella even when the sky is clear. I did not remove it. I only touched it, just enough to remind myself it was there. Then I closed my purse again and returned it to my lap, my hands resting lightly on top of it. Across the room, Daniel and Rebecca had joined the dance floor, their movements easy, synchronized, practiced. They looked comfortable in the center. They always had. I watched them for a moment, not with resentment, not even with disappointment, but with a kind of distance that felt new and unfamiliar, like stepping back from a painting you have spent years standing too close to. The details become clearer that way, the patterns more obvious, the intentions harder to ignore. I leaned back slightly in my chair, allowing myself a small breath that did not show on the surface, and let the room continue around me, as if I were simply another guest enjoying the evening. Because that is what they believed, that I would sit, that I would smile, that I would accept the role that had been quietly assigned to me. And for now, they were right. I would sit, I would smile, I would say nothing, but not because I did not understand, and not because I agreed. I lowered my gaze briefly, just long enough to see the edge of the name tag still pinned in place, the lettering as clear as it had been when I first read it. Then I looked up again, my expression unchanged, my posture steady, my thoughts no longer searching but settled. Waiting, not for permission, not for explanation, but for the right moment. Because moments like that do not announce themselves. They arrive quietly, often when everyone else is too distracted to notice. And when they do, you either recognize them, or you miss them entirely. I had missed enough already. I did not intend to miss this one. I did not go looking for him, which is why I noticed him the moment he started walking toward me. There is a particular kind of presence that does not belong to celebrations like this, a quiet seriousness that stands apart from laughter and music, and he carried it with him as naturally as the others carried their glasses of champagne. He stopped just short of my table, giving me the kind of polite distance that suggests respect rather than hesitation, and for a moment, he simply inclined his head slightly, as if confirming something he already knew. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice low, steady, and familiar in a way that took a second to place. I looked up at him fully then, taking in the details I had only caught in passing before. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the measured way he held himself, the folder still tucked neatly under his arm. And then I recognized him. "Mr. Harrison," I replied, my tone calm, my expression unchanged. It had been years since I had last seen him, though his name had never really left my life. He had handled my husband's affairs with a precision I had come to rely on, the kind of man who spoke only when necessary and never without purpose. "I was not sure if you would remember me," he said, a faint hint of something almost like acknowledgement passing through his voice. "I remember people who do not waste my time," I answered, allowing the smallest trace of honesty to surface. He nodded once, as if that was exactly the response he had expected. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. The music continued behind him, the movement of the room unchanged, but there was a stillness in the space between us that felt separate from everything else. "I did not intend to interrupt your evening," he said finally, his gaze steady, not intrusive, but direct. "But I believe it is important that you are aware of something." I gestured lightly toward the empty chair across from me, an invitation without emphasis. He sat, placing the folder carefully on the table between us, though he did not open it immediately. "Your husband made several adjustments in the months before his passing," he continued, his voice quiet enough that it did not carry beyond our table. "Most of them were routine. One of them was not." I listened without reacting, my hands still resting lightly on my purse, my posture unchanged. "He included a provision," Mr. Harrison said, "that activates under specific conditions. Conditions related to how you are treated within the family, particularly in matters involving financial dependence and public conduct." I felt the words settle into place with a kind of precision that left no room for misunderstanding. Not surprise. Not shock. Recognition. "Go on," I said. He slid the folder slightly closer to me, though he still did not open it. "The provision states that any individual who benefits from your financial support, while simultaneously subjecting you to public disrespect or misrepresentation, forfeits their claim to any future distribution of the estate." He paused, just long enough for the meaning to become fully clear. "In simpler terms," he added, "those who reduce you to a source of funding lose access to everything else." I let out a slow breath, not visible, not audible, but enough to mark the shift inside me. Across the room, laughter rose again, bright and unaware, as if the world had not just tilted in a way that would change everything for the people at the center of it. "And how?" I asked, my voice even. "Are those conditions determined?" Mr. Harrison's expression did not change, but there was a subtle firmness in his tone when he answered. "Documentation, witness accounts, public evidence. Tonight provides more than sufficient material." I did not look down at the folder. I did not reach for it. Instead, I lifted my gaze briefly, scanning the room once more, taking in the details with a clarity that felt sharper now, more defined. The glances, the comments, the carefully placed words, the small white card still pinned to my dress. "I see," I said quietly. Mr. Harrison inclined his head again, as if acknowledging not just my understanding, but my restraint. "You are not required to act immediately," he said, "but you should know that the option exists." I allowed a small pause, just enough to consider the weight of that statement, before I nodded once. "Thank you." I said, my tone unchanged, my expression calm. He stood then, as quietly as he had arrived, taking the folder with him, leaving nothing behind except the knowledge he had delivered. I watched him walk away, his figure blending back into the edges of the room where he belonged, unnoticed by those who were too focused on the center. And then I turned my attention forward again, my hands still, my posture steady, my thoughts no longer searching for answers, but settling into something far more precise. Not a reaction, not an impulse, a decision. And decisions like that are not made in a rush. They are made in silence, shaped carefully, and carried out at exactly the right moment. I reached up once more, my fingers brushing lightly against the name tag, feeling the weight of it with a clarity that felt almost different now. Not heavier, just more defined. And for the first time that evening, I allowed myself the smallest shift in expression. Not a smile, not quite, but something close enough that anyone watching would not question it, and far enough that no one would understand what it meant. The rest of the evening unfolded exactly as it was meant to, at least for everyone who believed they were still in control of it. The music grew louder, the lights softened slightly, and the energy of the room shifted from polite celebration to something more relaxed, more indulgent. Glasses were refilled without being asked, conversations became easier, laughter less restrained. I remained exactly where I had been, my posture unchanged, my expression steady, my presence blending into the rhythm of the night in a way that made me almost invisible again. And that, I realized, was precisely where I needed to be. Invisible people are rarely questioned. Invisible people are rarely interrupted. Invisible people are free to observe without resistance. I watched as Rebecca moved from group to group, her smile never faltering, her voice always perfectly pitched to match whoever she was speaking to. She thanked people, accepted compliments, adjusted small details with the ease of someone who believed the entire evening belonged to her. Daniel followed a similar pattern, though less fluid, his attention divided between conversations and the quiet need to ensure everything appeared exactly as it should. They were managing the room, controlling the narrative, or at least, they believed they were. I reached for my purse again, not hurriedly, not in a way that would draw attention, but with the same calm deliberation I had used earlier. This time, I opened it fully. The envelope was still there, exactly where I had left it, its edges smooth, its contents untouched. I slid it out just enough to see the corner of the paper inside, the familiar weight of it confirming what I already knew. Then I closed my purse again and let it rest against my lap, my hand placed lightly over it as if it were nothing more than a habit. Across the room, the wedding planner reappeared, her movements slightly more urgent now, her attention focused on coordinating the next part of the evening. She spoke briefly with a member of the staff, then glanced toward Daniel and Rebecca before moving in their direction. I followed her with my eyes, not directly, not in a way that would be obvious, but enough to understand the sequence of what was about to happen. Another announcement. Another moment designed to gather attention. I did not need to hear the details. I had already seen enough to know how it would be presented. I shifted slightly in my chair, aligning myself with the center of the room, my view unobstructed, my position unchanged. A microphone was lifted again. The music softened. Conversations paused. It always happens the same way. People are drawn toward sound, toward structure, toward anything that tells them where to focus. I let my gaze move slowly across the room one more time, taking in every detail with a clarity that felt almost sharpened now. The guests, the arrangement of tables, the placement of the lights, the positioning of Daniel and Rebecca, standing just slightly elevated from the rest, as if the evening had been built around them. And then, without any visible change in my expression, I made my decision. Not in a dramatic way, not with any outward sign, just a quiet, internal shift that settled into place with certainty. Timing is not about urgency. It is about precision. I waited. I listened. I allowed the moment to approach on its own, rather than forcing it into existence. That is where most people fail. They act too soon. They reveal too much. They mistake emotion for clarity. I had none of those problems anymore. The room fell into that familiar hush again as the next announcement began, voices lowering, attention narrowing, anticipation building in small, almost imperceptible ways. I did not move. I did not speak. I simply remained exactly where I was, my hand still resting lightly over my purse, my posture composed, my gaze steady. Because by then, everything was already in place. Not just the event, not just the people, but the outcome. All that remained was the moment when it would become visible to everyone else. And moments like that, I had learned, are most powerful when they arrive quietly, without warning, in the middle of something that was never meant to be interrupted. The microphone picked up a soft hum before the next speaker began, a small technical adjustment that drew just enough attention to center the room again. And I watched as Rebecca stepped forward this time, her smile already in place, her posture composed in that effortless way she had perfected over the years. She thanked everyone again, her voice warm, gracious, carefully paced, and then she began to speak about generosity, about support, about how meaningful it was to have family who gave so selflessly to make dreams come true. The words were chosen well. They always were. Around me, I could feel the subtle shift in attention, the way heads turned slightly, the way a few eyes moved in my direction without fully settling. I remained still, my hands resting lightly over my purse, my expression unchanged, my gaze steady. She was building something. I could hear it in the rhythm of her voice, in the pauses she allowed just long enough to create anticipation. And tonight, she continued, her tone lifting just enough to signal importance. We want to recognize that generosity in a special way. There it was, the moment she believed she controlled. A server stepped forward with a small tray, placing a document and a pen on the table near the center, positioned where it could be seen but not immediately questioned. I watched Daniel glance at it briefly, then at Rebecca, his expression neutral but compliant, as if he had already agreed to whatever came next without needing to hear it again. It is just a simple acknowledgement, Rebecca said, her voice light, almost dismissive, a way to formalize what has already been so generously given. A few guests nodded, some smiling, most not fully understanding but willing to accept the explanation because it fit the tone of the evening. I did not move. Not yet. I let the silence stretch just slightly longer than expected, just enough for the absence of my response to become noticeable without being disruptive. Then, slowly, deliberately, I stood. Chairs shifted softly around me as people adjusted their view, their attention narrowing in that quiet way it does when something unexpected begins to unfold. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. I walked toward the center with the same measured steps I had taken all evening, my posture straight, my expression calm, my gaze steady. Rebecca's smile held, but I saw it flicker for just a fraction of a second as I approached, the smallest crack in something she believed was secure. I reached the table and looked down at the document without touching it, my eyes scanning just enough to confirm what I already understood. Then I lifted my gaze, not to Rebecca, not to Daniel, but to the room itself, allowing a brief moment of silence to settle before I spoke. It is a beautiful evening, I said, my voice clear, even, carrying just enough to reach beyond the immediate circle without needing to be raised. A few people nodded, uncertain, waiting. I placed my hand lightly on the edge of the table, not on the paper, not on the pen, just enough to anchor the moment. And I am glad that everything has turned out exactly as planned. There was a subtle shift then, a ripple of something unspoken moving through the room, as if people sensed that the script had changed but had not yet understood how. I allowed a small pause, just long enough to let that feeling settle, before continuing. But I have learned something tonight, I said, my gaze steady, my tone unchanged, about what generosity means, and more importantly, about how it is remembered. Rebecca's posture tightened slightly, her hand lowering just a fraction, her expression still composed but no longer effortless. Daniel looked at me then, fully this time, his attention no longer divided, his certainty no longer complete. I did not look at either of them directly. I did not need to. And because of that, I continued, my voice calm, measured, precise. I think it is only appropriate that we clarify a few things before anything else is signed. The room was quiet now, not silent, but focused in a way that no announcement had achieved all evening. I reached into my purse then, not hurriedly, not dramatically, and removed the envelope I had touched earlier, placing it gently on the table beside the untouched document. I did not open it. I did not explain it. I simply let it sit there, visible, undeniable, a presence that did not belong to the script that had been prepared. Then I stepped back slightly, my hands returning to rest at my sides, my expression unchanged, my posture steady. And for the first time that evening, the center of the room no longer belonged to them.